Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Shifting Culture. Excited to be here today with my friend Valerie Hope. She and I got to know each other when we went to Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute, and we've stayed connected ever since then. In the intro, when I sent out the invite to this, I mentioned that Valerie is the best listener that I've met, and she asks tough questions. She was a little surprised by the listening deal, but that's just because she's humble. But at Berkeley, the very first thing, an interaction we had, she just starts asking hard questions and wants to know more about you and none of this surface stuff. And that really kind of resonated with me, and we've stayed connected. And she's been a great friend, mentor, coach all along the way. And so excited to have her. So welcome today, Valerie.
Thank you, Frank. And right back at you. Who would have thought that 3.5, 4 years later, we'd still even be wanting to talk to each other. You've added so much value to my life too, and your expertise and your thoughtfulness have been super helpful. So I appreciate you having me on your show.
Yeah, sure. Excited to have you today and just chat a little bit about kind of what you're doing. You do a lot of really interesting stuff. I know we were chatting earlier this week and you were doing coaching in the evening and then had committee meetings or something like that. I was tired just listening to the stuff that you've got going on.
Tired, yeah.
So we'll kind of kick off. I always start off, as I mentioned to you, with the pace lap, and just tell us a little bit about who Valerie is. Kind of where did you grow up and what do you do now?
Yes. Well, the grow up story is, I don't know, there's more than a pace lap probably. But I'm originally from the Republic of Panama, and we immigrated to the U.S. when I was 9 years old, when my father joined the U.S. military, the Army. And so we moved around quite a bit. So I think that informed a lot of who I am too, my experiences. I was exposed to a lot of different countries and cultures. And even after college, traveled quite a bit myself. I went to the University of Alabama. Roll Tide. I know I'm supposed to say that. I don't even watch football, but I'm supposed to say Roll Tide when you go to Alabama. And a big part of who I am, you mentioned asking hard questions. My mom will tell you that when I was a kid, I was that person.
Yeah.
She'd have her friends over, and all of a sudden she's like, where did my friends go? And they're talking with me in the living room. And it's like, what does a 6-year-old have to say to a group of 30-year-old women? And I'm like, I just had questions. I was curious about stuff all the time. So that's the gist of who I am. Has come a lot of it from my experience and exposure with other people. And I've always been just curious about getting to know and understand what makes people tick and why people think the way they think. And that's maybe where the listening also comes in. I've learned over the years how to be better at listening, be a more intentional listener. But people tell me a lot of really profound things. And I feel like my listening, encourages that, but also allows me to get as much from it as what the person is getting from sharing.
Yeah, no, super neat. So you went to Alabama, and then kind of what happened after that?
Oof. Life. So after Alabama, I actually went to work for a nonprofit organization called Up With People, which was very well known back in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. But that organization, when I went to it in the 90s, it was really about travel, international travel. We performed a musical, we did community service. And the biggest part, we lived with host families. So I actually went to work for them I started out as a PR rep, so event planning, and then also went into recruitment and operations. So for 5 years, I worked with this organization, living out of a suitcase, mind you, and living with host families throughout. And so in the 5 years, I probably lived with like 400 host families.
Wow.
In anywhere as far as Venezuela, in Estonia, in Finland, in Poland. I mean, you name it, we got a chance to go all over the US and Canada. But that was such a beautiful experience. And then the group itself that I worked and traveled with, comprised of over 100 people every year. We had a huge new group of people and representing about 20 to 30 countries. So even within the group, there was also a lot of cultural experiences. So that was my 5 formative years right after college, and then moved to Dallas, Texas shortly after that, and established myself here. That's where I now currently live. Started in the a nonprofit space in the Chamber of Commerce here in Dallas.
Okay.
And from there, moved into hospitality industry, worked for Hyatt Hotels for 14 years. And the last 3 years have been a journey in entrepreneurship, which you have been a big part of.
Yeah, so we met at Berkeley back in 2017, and you were kind of looking at a transition of what you wanted to do next at that point in time, and you've really kind of embraced, we had 24 people, I think, in our class at Berkeley, and they have people, multiple times a year going through that class. But I think from the people that I'm aware of, you probably embraced that as far as shifting completely into coaching and training and the work that you do more than anybody out of the group. So tell us a little bit about what all you're doing now.
Well, I don't know about more than anybody else in the group, but I'm really your favorite, so I'll accept it. No, basically, yeah, after going through the executive coaching program, I always knew that coaching was going to take some part of my life. Even when I was at Hyatt, I was doing coaching, and I started to enjoy and develop a lot of skill around it. So that really boosted, Berkeley kind of boosted me in that direction. And I created my business around leadership coaching and professional speaking, because I just love to teach as well, facilitation and keynotes and workshops, etc. So now, and that even evolved over the last 3 years, because the topics that I like to talk about, or the coaching that I like to do, I've been honing more and more what my favorite topics are. And I would say, to be honest, I'll just call it out right now, I'm a coach, but I wouldn't necessarily, I think those are all skill sets that can be applied. They're tools. I have coaching toolkit, if you will.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily limit myself to thinking I am a coach. I do coaching because I have this toolkit for coaching. But, I do a podcast just like you, and you've been a guest of my podcast. Yep. And the same toolkits that I use in coaching have helped me also in my podcasting. I'm in my second podcast right now. There's the art of asking curious questions, and the listening, and the opportunity to guide conversations in meaningful ways. So now I'm starting to kind of, I don't know what the word is, but I feel like really expand and stretch myself, and know that, okay, I have this great toolkit. Where else can I use it? How else could it work for me and support and contribute in meaningful ways to others? So,
yeah. Well, that ties us into the next question of kind of what really drives you. So expand on that a little bit more, and I'll specifically ask the question, in your email and on website, you have this connect to joy in your signature line and all that. So tell us a little bit. I'm assuming that ties in with what drives you. So tell me a little bit about that.
A little. It's such a big thing to talk about. I think it's part of my makeup has always been to figure out what makes me come alive. And I don't even know when I heard or found this particular quote, but ever since I heard it, I was like, oh, that's me. It's Howard Thurman. He was a mentor to Martin Luther King and a theologian. And the quote reads, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs are more people who have come alive." And once I heard that, I was like, oh, this is how I want to live. This is the compass, right? So figuring out and being conscious about what brings me to life. I mean, and I can give you examples from like way back when I was even in high school or junior high, where I could see now that has been my path. I just didn't know what to call it. And that quote kind of brought it to light. And in my business, I don't know, I feel like we've been granted gifts. Like, all of us are so different. One thing I like to share is that, how they always talk about everyone has unique fingerprints. Mm-hmm. Can't see it, but I'm sure I'm in a database someplace. But like all of us. But we all have these unique fingerprints. But the purpose for having unique fingerprints is because we all leave a very unique mark on the world. And our job is to figure out, what is that mark? And for me, it's not necessarily about bringing joy necessarily. Like, it's not like Valerie shows up and poof, joy shows up, as much as it is supporting people and connecting to what brings them to life, right? And joy is that one quality that I think encompasses not only an emotion, like a feeling of happiness, but also fulfillment and purpose. Like that's that one word that kind of, I think, connects all those sentiments really powerfully. And so Connect Joy was the name of the company that my younger brother and I came up with, because I think it just encapsulated what I want and what I think is the aim of living. Like if I die today, I don't hope to, but if I did, my life would have been absolutely joyful. And it is joyful for that purpose, because I make an intention. That's what drives me towards that.
Yeah. No, I think, I don't know about you, but what drew me to Berkeley versus some of the other coaching options that are out there was their whole attention to what has heart and meaning. And I know in our conversations between you and I always feel like you do a great job of kind of digging into that. You, because of your listening skills, you're able to pull out what has heart and meaning and go towards those things. And I think by letting your clients or friends or whoever kind of talk through those things that you pull out and notice have heart and meaning to them, that provides joy of just, hey, wow, I guess I didn't realize that I get so excited when I talk about those things or whatever. And I think that's part of the skill that you bring to the table that does connect people to joy when you talk with them.
Yeah, I would agree. I do listen for that. But because I do it for myself, I'm very clear that I can't teach something I haven't learned. Mm-hmm. That's like basic, right? I can't give something that I don't have. And so if I don't have a measure of joy, or not conscious about what it is that brings me alive, that sense of aliveness, or I don't even know what it feels like, how can I really point it out or extract or help other people connect to it? And so I make myself as responsible for living what I teach or preach, right? But that's an innate part of who I am, is to like, okay, always draw on that. Like, oh my gosh, but Frank, I noticed that you love this, or you're really good at that. How are you applying that? Or how does that show up? Or, what's getting in the way of actually, expanding on it? So those are the type of things that I like to support people in achieving. And then also not only discovering what it is, because it's one thing to be like conscious of, oh yeah, I really love doing this, or I'm really good at that. But the other piece is, all right, so where can you connect this to something you're doing? Like, how is it showing up on your calendar? How is it showing up in the relationships you have? How is it showing up in the type of work that you do? Right. And then once you have the connected piece, like, okay, now I know where to apply it. Like, okay, now what are you going to create with it? Like, how are you going to contribute it? So those are all the pieces that I think need to be put together in order for someone to take that knowledge about themselves and make a difference.
Yeah, well, you just answered the question. If anybody was wondering, why does Frank have Valerie on his Elevating Life Through Work Shifting Culture podcast? It's exactly what you're talking about. And I think that's what attracts me to you, is that desire to help people, to connect those dots and to help them elevate their life through their work, because you ask those challenging questions of, this gets you excited, how are you using that in your work, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's essential. Yeah, well, I mean, otherwise, why are we talking?
Yeah.
What's the point? And not to say that everything has to like it has to have an intention and a purpose, but man, at the very least, feel good about it. At the very least, even if you do nothing with it, if that's a powerful choice to, you know what, I love doing this and I will do absolutely nothing else with it other than just enjoy the fact that I can do it. All right, cool. As long as you're conscious about that too, go for it.
Yeah. So one of the things I like about this platform is the audience can ask questions. One of these things that's dangerous about that is my teammates can ask questions who are watching this. And so one of my guys, Ryan, wanted you to make Frank show the video, and he calls it My Dance from Berkeley, but it was a skit that we had to do at Berkeley. And then another teammate chimed in supporting him. So always dangerous to give people access to the comments, and now the reputation is that I have a dance video somewhere out there.
Well, I can't speak to the dance video, but I will say that your skit did enlighten us to the depths of talent that you have. and your acting chops are actually quite strong. We're like, wow, because for those of you who know Frank, he's kind of a quiet, unassuming guy. You wouldn't know from the fancy glasses and the colorful shirts. there's such stillness and depth. But when you were on stage for that particular moment, there were some things that we were all quite delighted by, to see how you showed up when actually, and there more than one occasion, by the way, you had a skit, and then we also had the scenes that we did, and both of them really dynamic. So you should show them the video, Frank. Don't hold out. Don't be scared.
It was definitely a growth opportunity for me. That is for sure.
It was a delight.
Yeah. Also want to chime in. We've got Dennis has joined us out there, so we appreciate you being in the audience today, Dennis. And then again, my big sister's watching, so glad to have Carol in the group. So transitioning a little bit from where we're at, so car racing kind of theme through this. A yellow flag is something that there's an obstacle or a crash or something. So in your life, in your career, what's been the biggest obstacle you've had to overcome?
Biggest obstacle, I think the one that I wouldn't say even necessarily the biggest, but is the one that seems to be the most recurring obstacle. And I have termed it divine discontent. Right? Divine discontent. And I may even share this with you in some of our coaching conversations, whereas this idea that, I'm moving down the path and things seem to be trucking along and, pretty smoothly. And then all of a sudden I'm like, all right, I'm bored. Like, what's next? and not bored as in, like a 7-year-old whiny kid. I'm bored. I don't know what to do. Because I always feel like I'm doing many things, but there's something about it that perhaps has lost the fulfillment, and because I'm so keen on making sure that whatever I'm doing is bringing me to life, I have to have an empowering context for whatever it is I do. So if I'm no longer able to find one, that makes it kind of a challenge. And I've experienced it on many occasions throughout my life, right? And that's usually the indication that I have to pivot either into a new way in which I do my work, or perhaps pivot in the relationships that I have. It could be a pivot in the resources. That might be the impetus to take a new course, or to get involved in another type of group, things like that.
Yeah. So speaking of that, so you mentioned that I was on your podcast. I don't know when that was back in the summer or sometime like that. Yeah. And but you've recently created a new podcast with a different theme because the old one got boring to you, and so you had to have some divine discontent.
I don't feel life anymore.
But you did like 100 episodes, I think, on the first podcast. So that's obviously not just a whim for a month and then moved on. I mean, that's quite a commitment to do 100 episodes. And but your new one has a real interesting twist to it. So tell us a little bit about your new podcast.
Sure. Well, one thing I will say, there was a moment of divine discontent with the old podcast, the previous podcast. It was called Time to Come Alive, ironically. And when I noticed, I'm like, I'm not coming alive. So this summer, obviously, there's so much going on here in the United States during the summer. Obviously, the pandemic has been ongoing for the last 12 months, but also all the things that started to come to the surface and dialed up around racial injustice, right? Mm-hmm. The diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging. Like, there are so many things. And I wasn't always sure if that's the space I wanted to be in. And I'm actually sure that it's not the space I want to be in, but I also felt there was a responsibility. And primarily because I'm Latina and I'm Black, and I've traveled to different places, I have a different listening for that experience. Yeah. And I knew that, okay, I can bring something, and I don't know what exactly it is, but at the end of the previous podcast, I decided I was going to be kind of listening for what is it that I can bring that would be meaningful. And I had an interaction actually in a workshop or a seminar that was around racial justice, where we had a breakout session. And in the breakout session, we were asked to share who's in your community, what's your community like. And one of the participants in the group shared that, oh my goodness, I wish my community was more diverse, because I'd shared, I travel and I have friends from all over the world and different religions and races and all that. She's like, I wish my kids had access to that. And I'm like, well, why don't they? You live in a metropolitan area. I don't understand. And she shared what she shared. And it left me thinking, even after that interaction. It was very brief. We were in the breakout for like 5 minutes or something. And it just left me thinking, well, if it's something that's so innate and so easy for me, what is it that makes it difficult or challenging for others? And where could I support that? That's the other thing that drives me, is like providing people, connecting them, right? And she clearly had a desire and needed and wanted to know how. And so the podcast I created is called Not Quite Strangers. And the premise is bringing people together who do not know each other to have a meaningful conversation around anything. And I'm generally a pretty good, I can identify like what could be that thread perhaps that could tie two people together. And then from that thread, really start to expand the conversation. And funny enough, the guest, that person that was in the breakout room, I've invited her to be on the podcast already. I have not released that episode yet, but we talk about that experience and what is it that she was looking for in her child's life, but that she needs to bring because her child is quite young. But this idea of, the dimensions of diversity that we focus on are generally very shallow. If we talk about someone's skin color, to talk about where somebody was born, I mean, those are actually quite arbitrary. We have no control. No 6-month-old would ever say, I know why I am this color, or I know why I was born in this part of the world. There's no way. It's so arbitrary, and yet we make it mean so much about who we are and how we move and what we have access to and what we don't have access to. And so what I want to challenge and what I bring to this particular space is diminishing some of the contrast, the noise that sometimes distract us from what the element of humanity is. And that's what I want to continue to highlight, is bringing the element of humanity, not to diminish or dismiss those identifiers, those qualities or characteristics, but really to hone on the things that actually are a lot more, they're long lasting, right? These are the human traits that will go on for millennia if we're lucky and if we do things the right way.
Yeah, no, it just was such an interesting concept or idea, I thought. And again, it suits you perfectly, of that connecting. We're part of a mastermind group, and I'm trying to think. We've got people from Europe,
Asia,
South America. And those are all people that you've connected. I got invited to be part of the group, and you were the one that pulled this, eclectic group of people together. And it's been just really interesting. And like you said, people are people, though, at the same time. I jump on a morning LinkedIn Live on Tuesday mornings. There's a broadcast about business culture from Malaysia. And the conversation's the exact same conversation that we have here about business culture, because people are people, and people there need the same things in their business culture that we need here. And so that we're much more connected than we give each other credit for a lot of times. And we try to make skin color, place of origin, and all that kind of these, we're different. And it's like, well, we've had different experiences, yes.
Yeah.
But
yeah. But that still doesn't, and again, not to take away anything. I mean, our differences often inform how we move in the world, what access we have to certain things. There are definitely systems that work for and against the differences that we might or may not align with, right?
No. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not denying any of that, but I think the level of significance that we give it, that it limits what we're capable of, that it limits what we can influence, what it limits how we can contribute in meaningful ways. That's the part that I want to challenge, but also like to develop curiosity. I think that's one of the things that's helped me really curate a group of people from different countries, cultures, personalities, expertise, industries, is this idea of just, can we get curious about each other? Can we build connection in meaningful ways? And then in some ways that does challenge. I remember, I don't know if you've talked about this and if it's appropriate. Well, I don't care anymore.
Yeah, throw it out.
But you and I had a conversation once, and you mentioned it made such an impact. I asked you, Frank, when was the first time you realized you were white? Do you remember this?
Yep.
Yeah, and what did you tell me?
Yeah, I told you that the first time I realized, And I think your full question is, when was the first time you realized that you were white and it made a difference?
It made a difference. Like it mattered. Yes.
Yeah. First grade, there was a girl that I had a crush on, and her name was Andrea. And my parents kind of went through a mental exercise trying to figure out who this girl was, because they thought they knew the parents of all the white girls in class, and they probably did. And she was not a white girl in class. And I just remember, as a 6-year-old in first grade, their reaction to the fact that I had a crush on a black girl was, wow, there's something different here. This is not, approved.
Right.
And so, we've all had that experience where that first time when you're like, wow, that's an interesting reaction. I just thought it was Andrea. I didn't realize that. So I love that question. And I've used that question in a training class that I've done, because I think it's so spot on for everybody, because I'm sure everyone's experienced that. I know you've shared your story, and I would love for you to tell your story about that you told me when you asked me that question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a great icebreaker, isn't it?
Yeah.
Talk about
what could go wrong there? Yeah.
breaking an iceberg, really. Yeah, and it came up for me because I didn't realize I was Black and it mattered until I was 14, which people would be like, really? That's old. But you got to remember, I was born in another country, and in the country, especially in Panama, we're from the capital, which is very diverse, racially diverse. Now, that doesn't preclude it from having issues with race and all of that. But I grew up with kids who were, that were from Asian descent, people who were from Middle Eastern descent. That was who we hung out with when we were children. And then moving into the US, we lived on military bases, which also tend to be quite diverse as well. And, I actually lived in Hawaii for 4 years, and there weren't that many Blacks and whites per se. If you're thinking skin color, there's a lot of Filipino, there were Japanese, there's a lot of Asian ethnicities and nationalities. But what's funny is when we left Hawaii, we moved to Southeast Alabama. And again, in a military base. And on the military base, you wouldn't know anything. But there was only two high schools that those of us who were high school age could go to from the military base, because we did not have a high school on the base. And therefore, we had to go to a local high school. And these are high schools who were at one point segregated, right? Because that was part of the culture and the history. And so when I walked into school the very first day, I remember going to the lunchroom, walking to the lunchroom, and I saw all Black students sitting on one side of the room and all white students sitting on the other side of the room. And I'd only seen that on TV. Like, this is the 80s, right? Yeah. Mid 80s. And I'd only seen that in civil rights movies and stuff like that. Yeah. I had no idea that was a thing. And granted, it was not segregated, but socially, the culture of the location, that's how people grew up. Their parents were segregated, went to segregated schools, their grandparents, that's how it was set up. And I just remember having such a negative reaction to that. I was like, I don't buy into this. I don't prescribe to this. I'm not going to sit just because I'm a certain color that I have to sit on a certain side of the room. I don't know anybody here. And luckily on the bus, I'd met a student from Panama, actually, and she was a senior. Bless her heart, Marilyn Stanley let me go sit with her in the lunchroom. And because she was a senior, I guess people didn't care that much. But I was like, am I gonna get beat up for not prescribing to whatever others were doing? And for the first couple of years of high school was really tough. I became an introvert during high school, because I was like, I don't think I fit in here. I just need to get out as soon as I can. And that's shown up in other parts of my life where I started to see those contrasts. But that was the first time I realized it mattered to people, like even as much as where you sit or what you wear or where you hang out or who you hang out with. And for my family, that's not been our thing.
Yeah. No, I love the question, and it saddens me, when you hear the answers to those things, but it's the reality of where we're all trying to come from and where we're trying to get. It's part of that journey. And so, I mentioned audience questions. Somebody's throwing some heat here since we're on the topic. So how can someone find how can someone who finds themselves in a cultural majority utilize their privilege for the privilege and boosting of others? So,
Well, what was his name? I missed the name.
Bear.
Bear. Bear. I love that you're asking the question. My question back to Bear would be, go talk to people. Go get to know people. There's no, oh, a person of privilege should do X, Y, Z. Go serve people that you want to serve, but find out who they are and what they need. That's it. I'm always a little bit not to say suspect, that's probably too strong a word, but a little doubtful that having there's no paintbrush that one can come in. Okay, I have privilege, therefore I'm going to help X, Y, Z. Small example, even in my own experience, I went to an entrepreneurship event. Actually, it wasn't entrepreneurship. It was a Latinas event for Latin women. And I remember sitting at a table and overhearing these young professionals share how meaningful it would have been for them in high school to have had a professional mentor, like someone to really guide them, because their parents were immigrants. And what they shared, their parents were immigrants and hadn't worked in a corporate environment and really didn't know anybody in that space. So they kind of had to figure things out on their own, these young ladies. And overhearing that, I thought, I was very fortunate. We moved around quite a bit. My parents were always very resourceful. And I thought, well, how can I serve, right? What can I do, especially specifically with a population of young people who are immigrant? And so I ended up talking to my mentor and finding out, hey, what organizations and programs are there where I can support young people, high school, middle school age students. And that's what I ended up doing. I actually ended up teaching leadership courses and public speaking, which is what I already do anyway with adults. But for a population that may not have had access to that.
Yeah.
Part of it, Bear, I think, is just getting really curious about what community you want to serve and where you can serve, and then asking questions. That's the main thing. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that answer. I think a lot of times we may try to overcomplicate, but at the base of it, and I had this conversation with someone a few weeks ago on one of my programs, there's just this fear of misstepping. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to offend anybody unintentionally just because I'm ignorant on a topic or with the wrong question, or we've had the conversation. I had Cynthia Allen was on, and we were trying to understand the difference between Hispanic and Latina, and there's some fine pieces there. And so as a white person, we tend to just avoid some of that because I don't want to say the wrong thing, because I don't want to be offensive, and it's not helpful not to say anything though either. And so it's a learning process that we all have to be open to.
And and this is a process that you may not hear when you live in Germany or when you visit Egypt. Like as people living here in the Americas, it's a different level of conversation, right? So I think that's the other thing. And I would even go as far like Bear, if you really I'm going to talk to Bear because he's the one that asked the question. So you're the lucky one, Bear. But Bear, and others. If you were to really challenge and expand yourself, go into communities or spaces, places, even outside of the country, I would say, where you are not in the majority. And just notice your reaction to it. Notice how you move in that space. Notice how people react to you in that space. I think part of it is we have desensitized ourselves sometimes from situations that on a very human level, we would probably know how to manage if we also built the competency and the confidence, knowing what if I put myself in, if I'm in an environment where, let's call it majority male. First of all, I'm the only girl. I have 3 brothers. So I grew up with a lot of boys. All my brothers were Boy Scouts. I did a lot of stuff with boys. So it doesn't bother me that much. So when women talk about leaning in, I'm like, really? That's a thing? But when I'm in majority women's spaces, and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Now I have a different perspective because of the conversation. So I would say part of our job as human beings is to really, if we care, here's the caveat. If you care, and if you're asking a question, it tells me that people care, you care. Find ways to really, find your own stretch zone. not necessarily to go save someone. There's a wonderful quote by Dr. Lila Watson, and I'm paraphrasing it here, but she says, if you have come to help me, don't bother. But if your liberation is tied to mine, let's work together. So it's not about like, oh, who can I help? I have privilege, or I have this and I want to give it necessarily. It's more about how does this become an expression of who you are as a human being and your values? And if that goes together with the cause, then go to it. Not because I want to give a hand up, right?
Yeah.
So those are the pieces that come to mind, really, to expand our own experience of ourselves. And we become different people when we're in different spaces. There are different aspects of ourselves that, when I was traveling and living in all these host families, many of them had never seen a woman like me or had a person of color in some cases. Go to Finland, Norway, and Sweden, you don't see a lot of Black people. So in many cases, I was the only one. I remember, and you'll have to shut me up, Frank. I can share stories all day. But I remember specifically actually going to Estonia, and a great friend from the group, from Up With People in Estonia, Sven, and I stayed with him and his family there. And so we would go places on the bus, or we'd go to restaurants or cafes or something, and oh my gosh, people stared so much at me on the bus. And it wasn't like just sly look. Sometimes it was just a full-on like, wow. And I remember we went to a bar, and there were a few of us from the group, from the organization together, and several people came up to me and they were like, can we take your picture? Can we touch your skin? But I think those are the kind of experiences that also taught me that, so part of it is people are curious. And if they only see people on TV that look like me, and this is their first time in real life, then I also have an opportunity to share something that they may never experience, at least not in an authentic way. And I can be an ambassador. Sure, touch my hair. Not everybody wants to do that, but yeah, sure, okay. But I think being able to negotiate oneself in a different culture where you don't speak the language and you're not a majority, the majority group, is amazing. You get to see a different part of yourself.
Yeah, no, it is an interesting experience, and it gives you an opportunity at least to put your feet in other shoes and understand a little bit of that perspective. And it's all about, being uncomfortable. We grow more when we put ourselves in uncomfortable situations. Usually we have to have those uncomfortable situations thrust upon us, like a pandemic even, or something like that just kind of, you wouldn't pick to go through what you've gone through, but because you did, you've learned and become more empathetic or whatever to situations. And so learning, I always tell people, is expensive or painful, and usually both.
And I would add, we have a choice, right? And one of my favorite spiritual teachings is we have a choice to learn through joy or through pain. Mm-hmm. We literally do have a choice. That's why I think connecting to joy is so compelling to me, because it's a choice. Even in a pandemic, like, okay, so I learned to connect with people from, that at a distance. Our family gatherings have more meaning and impact now than they did when we could get together in person. Right. My brothers and I, although 3 of us live here in the Dallas area, one of them lives in Alabama, we actually get together on Zoom a couple times a month, sometimes more. And we've had like 4-hour-long conversations. We talk about our childhood, or we talk about something we saw on TV. We watch YouTube videos and laugh. I mean, level of conversation that we likely would not have had the pandemic not been the kind of the glue that brought everybody together. So we all have a choice. So I don't want to take that away. There's nothing around any external circumstance. There are people who are going through disease. There are people who've had significant loss. There are people who have, have a disability. There are people who have health concerns, have experienced trauma, and they can still choose joy. Now, there's work involved to get there.
Yeah.
It's not as simple sometimes, but it is accessible.
Yeah, well, I think, the Olympics is coming up later this year, and they always show those little stories about behind the scenes, and this is this person's life. And there's a large number of those Olympians that, have been through traumatic experiences in their life, especially some of the participants from other countries who have had to flee from their, war in their countries and all that. And to your point, they've chosen, you can become either a victim to that, or you can choose a different path, but it takes a tremendous amount of effort to overcome that gravitational pull a lot of times.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Two great books I would recommend. One is Left to Tell by Immaculée Ilibagiza. She's a survivor of the Rwandan genocide.
Yeah.
Fascinating book about how she, after surviving that, came out on the other side and still was able to have love and compassion for those who were doing the most atrocious crimes against Rwandan people, or the tribe. And then also Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, a classic as well. But those are two books that really demonstrate how those who had like extenuatingly traumatic external circumstances at play were still able to go back to like that humanity and figure out what they had to do to choose joy and overcome and transcend, not even overcome, I would say transcend the conditions.
Yeah. No, that's obviously I've heard of the Viktor Frankl book, but I haven't heard of the other one. Left to Tell is what.
Left to Tell. Immaculée Ilibagiza is the name.
Yeah, and I won't even try to spell that. But no, I'm sure that's what happened in Rwanda is just it's hard to get your head around, especially when you look back. And of course, now it's been coming up on 30 years.
Yeah.
But still, that's not that long ago. It sounds like something that you would read. And much like the Holocaust, I mean, that's not that far back in the world history that you just scratch your head and go, how did that happen? So,
well, you know what? And look, and I'm not a historian, but part of the reason that I was drawn to those two books in particular, and there are other things, I'm sure, many, many books and many other traumatic events that have shaped and people have transcended. But the thing that really drew me to those particular topics, that is the humanity that was lost in both of those situations, right? The genocide that happened, and there have been others, right? Those are not the only two places on earth that have experienced this. But right. It was about a loss of humanity, like people no longer seeing each other as people. There were labels. They were labeled by tribe. They were labeled by race or religion. And when we have these labels that drive people to create some sort of narrative about who that person is because they have a certain name, or they have certain features, or they have a certain skin color, those are the labels that start to divide us. And it is very easy. And then Left to Tell, she shares that they started referring to the tribe as cockroaches. Like when you disassociated humanity because you now replace the humanity with some sort of label, and that arbitrary label now means something about the person, that's a very, very dangerous road. And I think that's what I'm trying to challenge with my podcast is like, how do we get to like the element? And look, it's not political. It's not really, I'm not talking about the historical context or the systemic context necessarily, but really like, all right, those of you who want to know there's human beings on earth who feel, think, express, love, hurt like you, check it out, right? Go connect with people in your own life, get to know them, see what they're about, get curious about them. And this is just an opportunity to model that. So the moment that we lose our humanity, a lot of other things are lost.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'll tie that in with this conversation is directly relatable to business culture as well, because you see that to a different degree. I'm not going to compare it to a genocide or anything like that, but it's the same issue at the base of, leaders, lose that humanity piece on caring for their direct reports and their teammates and all those things. I had a conversation with the client just earlier this week, and they were interviewing a person. And during that interview, the person made it very clear that, they don't believe in, personal life and business life intersecting in any way, shape, or form. And, this person was interviewing for an HR position. And it's just like, fortunately, my client was like, okay, that's a deal stopper right there. Because, if you try to separate people's personal life from their work life and you're the one in HR, I don't see how you do that. But it's that you lose that humanity, and you think people that step in and come to work are somehow robotic and can just turn off the fact that they've got a sick kid or that they've got, challenges of any type. and can come to work and just completely focus. I mean, I can't do that. If I have, issues going on at home, I'm thinking about it while I'm at work. I surely take stuff home to my family when I've had a rough day at work. I mean, it's life and it all blends together. But that humanity piece is, I think, what distinguishes a great culture, when the leadership understands that and is more focused on the humanity than they are actually the business, because that the business will come if you take care of your people, I believe.
Oh, absolutely. I think the other piece, and what you brought to mind when you were sharing that example, is we do it in life all the time. Like, well, I don't have kids, but I, 9 nieces and nephews. And there are times that they want to play and they need to, if I go babysit them and my brother and my sister-in-law go out, I need to feed them. Like, I might be tired. I might be cranky. Maybe I didn't have a good day or whatever, but I'm accountable to that role. Right? We do it at home all the time. Frank, if you're sick and you're you don't feel like it, you still have to pay your light bill. You still have to, your wife still has expectations of how you show up as a husband. So we all have roles in our life that we have accountabilities, right? And I think if we do it all the time in personal life, it shows up a lot. I think the challenge sometimes is, if we're not if we're not a whole person when we show up to work, it's going to be really hard to ask people to show up as whole people, right? So it's likely a reflection not on, their professional, perhaps it's conditioning, right? Some of it is conditioning, but somehow they've left a part of themselves at home, right? But we do that sometimes too. We forget, we disassociate. What are you leaving at home? Mark Rittenberg, Dr. Mark Rittenberg, who is the founder of the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute, says this all the time. What are you leaving at home that you should be bringing to work? And what are you leaving at work that you should be bringing home? Right? We're whole people. How do we show up as whole, complete, and perfect in every space? That's what authenticity really is. Authenticity is wholeness. It's not necessarily just saying, yeah, this is my truth. No, that's not. That's just your mood. But can you show up and be in the same space? Can we recognize Frank? Whether he's at home, whether he's on the golf course, whether he's doing a podcast, whether he's managing Mosaic. That's what we want to know.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. That's true authenticity, is that wholeness. And that's tough, because a lot of times we don't want people to know about this shortcoming or whatever. And so we already know. You may not want it to, but we saw it. Very fair. Very fair.
We already know.
Yeah. No, I do. I get clients. We'll use some assessments, in our coaching. And I'll have clients that'll ask me, it's like, should I share this with my team? And I'm like, oh, I promise you, they're well aware of it. And they're always, like, what? And I'm like, they're around you 40, 50 hours a week. They probably have figured out you're not really good with the details.
Yeah, they can tell you all day long. And the challenge is, how much can you own that and either get, somewhat competent or be able to at least say, hey, I need to hire somebody that can really support me in this area, because it's an area I'm not that strong in. That's why I love like Marcus Buckingham's work around. I first was introduced to Strength Finders when he was at Gallup, and now the work he's doing around strengths is really empowering, because no, if you're whole doesn't mean that you do everything well. You just know where you need to partner with other people. That's why we all have these little unique fingerprints. Make your mark and give space for other people to make theirs.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you've seen Patrick Lencioni's new product that he has out called the Working Genius. Similar to Strength Finders, he has, you have your working genius, you have your working competency, and you have your working frustrations. And these things suck energy from you. These things are kind of a neutral, and these things actually give you energy. And so it's interesting to know about yourself. But then we did it at our offsite for our whole team. And you could then put it all together as a package and say, hey, Frank brings this to the table, but he's weak in this area. Oh, but look, Elizabeth brings this to the table. And so together we make a whole, and we cover all 6 of these elements as a group. And it just shows the importance of, yeah, it's okay that I don't have a great sense of innovation, but I've got somebody on my team that has a great sense of innovation. And
Is that
so,
really one of yours?
yeah, no, my worst two working frustration, my working geniuses are enablement and discernment, and my working frustrations are wonder and innovation.
Yeah.
So, and then in the middle, you have tenacity and galvanization. So I can get into the details and focus on them for short periods of time, but I can't do it for long bursts of time. And so it's helpful, to know personally, because the best way to be socially aware is to be personally aware, and then to look at it as a team. And I'm working with a client right now, and we're going to do that exercise with their entire team and kind of see, hey, where do you have holes, or what do you have, how do you benefit from each other's skill sets? Because sometimes those differences are exactly what frustrates you about the other person. And so if you can see it from a different way, that, oh, that's actually something I need that I don't have, and you've got it. Now, all of a sudden, you're an asset versus just that annoying person that I don't want to have to interact with.
Yeah, you got to know how to leverage those things around people. It's so funny. Well, I'm not familiar with Lencioni's that particular book, but it's interesting, and I might be definitely interested in knowing more about it. But with Strength Finders, when I got into Strength Finders, and even when I was in human resources, I used this quite a bit. Like, this copy's been around forever. But I was such a nerd about it. I had like my whole family take the assessment. And then I made like these tables, like every single family member, and I got their top 5 and I plotted them. So now I'm like, ooh, I know that I can go, my mom, my older brother, and I all share ideation, for example, but it manifests in different ways, right? That's our working genius, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so I know, like, my mom's very practical with ideas. So if I need something like a workshop and, hey, I have this exercise, what do you think, Mom? She's really good at that. My brother's ideation is more philosophical. So he helps me come up with a lot of ways to like shape or color, like he finds a container for ideas that I have. Like, okay, well, this really matches up to this particular philosophy. You might want to check out this book, or you might read this philosopher. So I know who to go to for certain things in my family because I know they're working genius.
There you go. You got their whole life plotted out there for them. How did they receive that information?
There are only 2 members of my family who declined to be typed. That was my dad and my younger brother. I'm like, no, we don't believe in that. No. So, but that's okay. I figured it out anyways. I just have to get really good at asking questions. That's probably why.
That's right. Yeah. It's like, it's okay for you to be in denial, but I know the truth.
Like you said, right? Leaders, we telegraph so much about our strengths and our deficiencies. People see them. We get them. Now, whether or not we know what to do about it is a whole different story, which is what your expertise is to like, okay, now that you have this information, here's how you can make it work for you.
Yeah. So Elizabeth's one of the folks on our team, and she's just commenting that it was really helpful to see those results and fill in each other's gaps there. So as we wrap up, I know we need to be kind of time sensitive because everybody doesn't have the rest of the day to just listen to us have a conversation. What's the audience takeaway? What's one thing you would like to share with our audience as we wrap up our time?
Yeah. I think back to what we were talking about earlier, is get curious about people in your world, in your life. Ask questions. The notion of being able to just understand who they are and how they were shaped and what's important to them. We don't have to agree or disagree. And when you talked about my listening skills, one of the things I'm learning and continuing to exercise is we all have this like internal hype man, right? That tells us, oh yeah, that's good. Oh yeah, what he said is great. Oh, you love that. Oh, that's so awesome. And we also have when it says, nope, what are you talking about? That's wrong. I don't like that. That's stupid, right? So we have this internal hype person in our head that's narrating how we're listening. The challenge is, are we listening to the hype man or hype woman, or are we listening to the person? And so my invitation would be, as we're getting curious, is to also allow that little voice to fade to the background. It's always going to be there. We can't really do much about that. But what we can do is not be beholden to it its opinions and ideas are the limitations actually that we have, just put on a little bit louder. So if we can just be curious without necessarily judging and assessing or using the filter, I think it will allow us a lot more insight into the people around us, a lot more insight into how we can serve, a lot more insight into, how we're viewed and what we can contribute, and how we can allow others to contribute to us. And then, check out my podcast. I think if you're interested in any of the stuff I said, these are the types of conversations that can make a difference. And go to notquitestrangers.com to subscribe, and you can get your episodes directly in your inbox. And we also, to support this idea of getting curious, my friend Felipe and I, Felipe from Brazil, have put together some connection challenges. So every other week we release a podcast one week, and the next week we'll send out a connection challenge so that you actually take some of these distinctions and apply them to your own world, in your own life. Wow, cool. Yeah. So that's my invitation.
Yeah. So no, thank you for that. So you mentioned your podcast. What other ways can people connect with you? What kind of training do you do? If people are looking for specific training, coaching, what are you kind of narrowing your coaching field into in that training piece?
Yeah, I do one-on-one, and I do some group coaching as well around leadership. Specifically, the ones the topics that I think continue to bring me to life is around listening, right? How leaders listen. Communication is always such a huge part of leadership. The challenge is there's so many more resources focused on how we speak, what we say, and very few resources and coaching around how we listen, right? So anything around that is really, I think that's area that I can support people. And also how to connect in meaningful ways with other people around you. So I call them my circle of influencers, and being really mindful and strategic about who we connect to and how we can best leverage those relationships. And there's other information on my website. So valeriehope.com is the place to reach me, and to also see some of the other things I'm doing in the world.
Yeah. Well, if you can put some of that stuff in the comments after this, that'd be super helpful for people to have that in front of them to do that. And just thank you. Thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing from your heart and being willing to have conversations of, wherever it takes us. I said, who knows what we'll talk about. So we covered quite a bit. And I think it's all important. It's great stuff on how do we connect with people? How do we change people's lives by connecting with them is really what I'm trying to help people understand through guests on this podcast. So I appreciate your willingness to be a part of that, and always great to see you.
Thank you so much, Frank. I don't take for granted that I have been invited to be a guest. And I will also add Frank's podcast appearance on my previous podcast. I think you said some things that were so meaningful around who you are and what's important to you. I think that your audience could get to know you even better. But more importantly, I think giving your peers and other colleagues this platform to share what they're up to, and you being able to amplify that, I don't take for granted. So thank you so much for having me in your playhouse.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being on, and we will talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Valerie. Okay, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Valerie is great. Always enjoy being around her and getting to have a chance to talk to her. Join us Monday at 11 a.m. Central Time. Linda Clark will be our guest. A lot of you know Linda. She's amazing in the HR leadership community. So looking forward to learning from her and talking a little bit of racing with her. She's an NHRA fan, but we're still letting her on the show, even though it's not Formula One is her top pick, but she may convince us that we should change over, and we look forward to that. So we will see you guys Monday at 11 a.m. Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend.